care about. This was an experiment from that time as well. It wound up being this in the end. I preferred just the black on black. Another point of inspiration at this time was sort of like the cult of taste and around decorators. Like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy was kind of at its most popular at this time. And so you had like gay men being kind of put forth as the harbingers of style, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's how it was portrayed. And I mean, it's true that a lot of interior designers are gay men. So in fact, the first time I ever met a gay person was when my mom hired an interior designer. And I immediately thought, like, why did you hire this person? Don't you know, like, what color you want the drapes to be? And, like, it just didn't make any sense to me. But this guy came into our house and it made me really uncomfortable. My parents definitely called him a fag when he wasn't there, and I was probably like 12. And I knew that there was some relationship between that guy and me. And then he stopped coming, and it turned out that he actually died of AIDS. So that was something that like sort of happened when I was very young. So I was thinking about that sort of sad story over top of all these kind of smiling faces too. Like Jonathan Adler's whole aesthetic is about like fun and beauty and color. This is an example of one of his interiors. So that led me to start creating these shrines. And the first one was called Meditation on a Jonathan Adler Pillow. So I was like obsessed with buying this pillow. I really wanted this pillow for my couch. And like, I always know that when I'm more interested in something like this than going to galleries, then I have to like think about that more critically. So this piece was all yarn, and it's about 6 by 6 feet, and it's shown with the actual pillow in front of it. And this was sort of the first thing I did in this series, and I wasn't really sure what I was doing. It seemed like kind of maybe like too silly to make something like that. I made this sculpture for a dog and a cat where I embellished a dog bed with yarn, and then that's a dog toy that kind of looks like a dick, and I cast it in ceramic. And it's got a little peacock feather because that's what they like. That's what cats play with. I got that at a pet store. So I got everything at a pet store, and then I had the rug custom made at the Jonathan Adler store, and then I welded the base. Klein Reader, these great ceramicists, commercial ceramicists in New York, and I really loved that vase on the left, so I decided I would make a piece for it. So this is Meditation on a Klein Reed vase, and if you get close, you see it's like kind of like a black mirror, sort of mirroring what the vase would look like from the top down. And then if you get, it's all yarn. And they're sort of done like trompe l'oeil so that it looks like it's sort of curving, but it's all flat. This is from 2010, Meditation on a Jonathan Adler Pillow, parentheses, It Gets Better. During the It Gets Better campaign, I thought it was like something you'd hear over and over again, and I thought it would be kind of funny if that was just something you kind of stepped on at your house. Because I feel like a lot of this fantasy is this retail fantasy is kind of sold as like a successful, urbane, bourgeois gay man's apartment. Like that's like what I feel like all of this stuff sort of represents, or what it represented to me at the time. So I had this teardrop blown, and then that sits on the actual pillow that inspired the work. At the sort of during the same time I was making these other shrines with album covers. Again, that's the Joni Mitchell album cover from before. I did remake it. And these are carved wood eyes with teardrops, and then that's sort of like a little dog turd, like what I imagine like Jonathan Adler would design like a dog turd to look like. So it's kind of got like this geometric finish to it in white ceramic. This is Patty, and the shelf, the back two legs of the chair sit on the shelf. They're like cut off, and that's something I saw on like a design challenge show on Bravo, so I wanted to copy that. And then there's a little ceramic poppers bottle, which is like something you buy at a sex shop and you inhale when you're having sex. and some shoes. And I was also doing windows at J. Crew at the time, and we were using these ferns a lot, so I wanted to use these ferns in it. Like things that I feel like are really antithetical to this album, which I love, but I also think a lot of the people that have this album have houses like this. So it all goes together anyway. This one is called Nico, and it's Jonathan Adler greyhounds sort of up to their necks in this yellow water with this double leash that kind of hangs between the two walnut panels. And then in Nina, which is the last one of these, you have this vase that I had blown that is full of lube, and it's resting on a cock ring, which is something that you wear when you're having sex, I guess, if you want to. And it needed something to sit on. It just seemed like the perfect shiny little thing. And I'd never bought one. And I went to the sex shop, and they were like, well, we have to measure you. And I was like, no, you don't. It's fine. And then these are Venus de Milo and David statues that I bought cheap online, like reproductions, and just smashed and then recast to make this chain. And so that's a George Nelson bubble lamp that's just screwed into the side. So during that time, like while I was making those pieces, I felt like there was like there was this implication that these were abstracted interiors that, while they were fictional, felt real to me. And I thought it was strange that there were never any figures represented. And I don't usually work with the figure, but I'd been looking at photography for a long time. I mean, when I was a little queer kid in high school, I would like sneak to Borders and like look at the Robert Mapplethorpe catalog. And I actually had it taken from me by a sales associate once. And then my mom, I told my mom about it, and she bought it for me, which was really cool. I don't think she ever even looked at it, so I don't think she knew. But I loved Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs, and I didn't find them terribly erotic because, I mean, that's not a bear, right? So I wasn't super turned on by them, but there was something about the way that the body is nude, but at the same time sort of desexualized, or at least undersexualized in some of the photographs. I mean, this one, maybe not. But I decided to take these kinds of things and re-photograph my sculptures with myself, and or with talent, as I called the people who collaborated with me. And the poses were references to yoga, to the illustration on the side of an enema thing, to Goya, and you'll see, I'll go through them. And these are printed about 40 inches tall, so they're pretty large prints. And they got a lot of play on Tumblr. Like I showed them to like one friend, and then it wound up on like sexy Tumblrs, artsy Tumblrs, design Tumblrs, and like it was cool because the work had this life beyond my studio, and people got to see it. And I got published in Butt magazine, which was cool at the time, and it actually brought people to my studio because they were like, "What is this dude doing? What are those things in the background?" This is my favorite. I put peanut butter on my tongue, and my dog stuck her head in my mouth. And it's kind of, there's this Goya painting called, I think, Saturn Devouring His Children or something, and it looks just like that. And I was psyched about that one. I did a project for Headmaster Magazine, which is a magazine that asks people to do assignments. And my assignment was to read this book called The Carnivorous Lamb, which is this 1970s symbolic anarchist gay novel translated from Spanish. And my assignment was to make a diorama, so I made this piece that incorporated a number of the symbols from the book, including the Spanish flag under, I think it was Castro, I think so. And then this sort of reoccurring character who would wear this dress, and then this lamb head. I do a lot of drawings, and whenever I get stuck in the studio, like after making those large installations, I was kind of stuck. I didn't want to keep spending 4 months on each piece that I made. So I just started making drawings, which is what I do kind of always. If I go to the studio and I don't feel like working on that thing in the corner, I just sit down and make a drawing so I feel productive. And I don't really filter it at all. Like, it could be something purely decorative like this, or just a watercolor with a book I'm reading, or this is called Candle Contest. It's my 3 favorite scented candles. Although now I think number 2 is actually number 1. I've switched them. This is called Bag of Dicks. I still have this on the wall in my studio. I love this drawing. I want to make a tapestry of it or something. I don't know what that was. Oh yeah, I do. It was just another drawing of this. So did any of you guys read the Mr. books or Mrs. Little Miss books? They were like a popular children's book series, and they're really basic shape characters in each book dealing with like their characteristic. And I was recently thinking about Mr. Fussy, and like Mr. Fussy's little story is about how like he's upset because his cousin, Mr. Clumsy, comes over and like wrinkles like the blades of grass in his yard, and like spills stuff on his wallpaper. And I was like, wow, Mr. Fussy feels kind of like a faggy decorator. Like, I'm kind of into Mr. Fussy. Maybe I'm Mr. Fussy. So I made this drawing of like a more sexualized Mr. Fussy, which I'm hoping to weave into like a 6-foot tapestry. That's going to be probably the end game for that. A couple years ago, I got very interested in abstraction. A lot of people in the art world are making abstract paintings, and very quickly, like really like gestural abstraction. And I loved some of those paintings, but I felt like, I was like, well, what if I made abstraction? Like, what would that feel like? What would, someone whose interest is in decorative art make, And so I started making all these watercolors really without thinking very much of if they were going to wind up anything. They were still part of like my regular studio process, but I sort of followed this one through line and saw to see where it would go. And these are just pencil with some watercolor. But they started to feel more and more like things I could actually make. And so I started making them. And that's about the size that they are. That's pretty much the size. So this piece and this piece were from the abstraction show at the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston that I was in a couple years ago. And that was sort of like the encouragement. I was so glad that Bill Arning came to my studio and liked them, because I felt like I'm not a painter. I'm not an abstract artist. Like, I felt like kind of fraudulent making these things, but they felt very easy. There was a pleasure in making them. But they were also not quite easy enough to be simple decorative works. They actually balance pretty precariously in those frames. So it's just using like tension and weight to kind of hold its form. This is a small stained glass piece I did. I took a weekend stained glass class because I always wanted to learn how to do it. It's not easy. And I made this. And the lady who taught it told me it was the weirdest thing anyone had ever made. And I thought that had to be impossible. But I think it was because I left some of the spaces empty, which I guess structurally is not really how you do stained glass, but it's very small, so it was fine. This is you can't tell, but the yarn is iridescent. Vanna White from Wheel of Fortune has her own yarn line. It's called, what is it called? It's got a really hokey name. But anyway, it's really cheap, terrible yarn, but she has the best metallic colors. So I think if I washed it, it would probably not be good, but I'm not going to wash it. So this one's about 6 feet tall. This is about 6 feet tall. This is to just give you a sense of the surface. I'm still using yarn. I feel like it is a material that brings with it this sort of crafty sensibility, but also allows me to be very exact. And it also lets people know that like my hand is involved in this work, even though the work is very angular and sharp. I think it's nice to have that soft surface. This is called Crying. This is called The Last Book. Here's a little install shot from the studio. This is an install shot from a show I did in Raleigh at this great artist-run space called Lump. And then I started drawing them in 3D to see what that would look like. Like I hadn't made a sculpture in a really long time, and I was like, I wonder what this would be like if I made a sculpture. So I worked with someone who's really good at rendering in 3D, and I sort of cut out all the components on a CNC router, which is a computer-led saw. It's great for building things that use complex angles and carpentry that I didn't necessarily have the skills to do. And it came out pretty well. I had, it's got one of the candles on a little shelf in front of it. And then some of the pieces are yarn, and then some of the pieces are lacquer, which is like a high luster, sanded down kind of luxury paint service that like fancy cabinetry is done with. And I did work with a fabricator to do those elements. I wanted like more of a contrast. It has a little drawer for weed. It always has weed in it. That's an important component of this piece, and a little suede lined magnet closure. And right now I'm working on these larger ones that are a little taller than me, just to give you an idea of the scale. And those are getting cut right now, actually. So I'll start assembling them and then surfacing them. And I like it because it pulls in some of the elements from the interior design installations where there's sort of things hanging off of it and things in front of it that imply a sort of domestic use, and it has the scale of furniture, but it's still kind of in the language of like abstract sculpture that you would see at a museum. And I like playing with that kind of art in quotes along the, like, but being kind of at the mercy of a decorator's kind of instinct.
You said that those are called what?
Yeah. This one will have live flowers when it's shown in a little Klein Reed vase with a little ceramic poppers bottle. It's called Sun Standers. And that brings me to my last body of work that I'm going to show you guys today, which is called Plants vs. Zombies. How many of you guys know that, that game? Raise your hand if you've ever played that game. Oh, I'm so glad so many people play it. I play it every day. I'm obsessed with it. It's an iPhone game. I highly recommend it. It's free. It's a great game, right? And it's really inventive. I mean, just like the language, that title is so weird, and I love it. So the pieces that I started creating were these watercolors that don't necessarily relate to the imagery in the game, but they are flat. A lot of my work has a flatness to it, which I think is definitely derived from hours and hours spent in flat video game landscapes. But they all sort of incorporate these two forces, both plants and what I call zombies, but they're really arms and sort of things that could be heads. And then they incorporate other things. So this one has this pill, which is supposed to represent Truvada, which is a pill you take once a day so you don't get HIV. It's pretty new. A lot of people are doing it. This one incorporates incense, which I feel is like a very like kind of hippy-dippy domestic accoutrement that I have at home. And then it's just, I give myself this frame, this architectural frame, which makes me kind of think of like what I imagine like a Joni Mitchell's like Laurel Canyon apartment or like pad would have, like to her outside patio. Maybe she'd have like some plants. So it's kind of like this utopian, at least personal utopian scenario, but then it has this ongoing struggle between these two forces. And I really don't think I can talk too specific about what it means because I'm still making them, but I'm enjoying making them, and I'll just keep showing you them. Oh no, my favorite one. I can't show you. That's okay. The last image I'm going to end on kind of goes